The noble stag. Ever since man could paint the walls of caves, the deer has been the symbol of speed and grace. Man has always been entranced by the deer. He's adorned his coat of arms with their figures, and their antlered heads have hung in many a baronial hall. Even today, the sight of a deer on the hill stirs our over-civilized hearts. Perhaps he's what we all wish to be, monarch of the glen, proud and free. To most people, deer are Highlanders, found in the wilds of Exmoor or in their mountain strongholds of Scotland. Few realize that one species, the roe, is abundant up to the very doorsteps of suburbia, wherever there's a largish wood to hide it. There's almost certainly a roe not 100 yards from these laybys. The roe's adapted by becoming much more secretive. More than any other species, it's a deer in hiding. It's our smallest native deer. The male or buck stands less than 3 feet at the shoulder, a good size for so secretive a creature. Fossil bones have shown that the roe today is essentially unchanged from his ancestors of 500,000 years ago. Its shape and form seem so well adapted that alteration has been unnecessary for this immense length of time. Since roe were roe, they have lived in forests, usually broad-leafed woodland. Eminently adaptable, they can, however, change their lifestyle to suit many types of habitat. Until the beginning of the last century, the roe survived only in Scotland. They were introduced in 3 places in England, and they spread widely in both north and south. Now there's hardly a county in Britain without its quota of roe. A prime example of the deer's success is Thetford Chase. The roe population here, now numbering over 1,000, derives solely from 6 deer introduced in the 1880s. Over 60,000 acres in area, Thetford is the 2nd largest forest in England. Conifers, divided by grass tracks or rides, make up the bulk of the forest, reflecting modern man's desperate need for usable timber. They also make an ideal habitat for the roe. Dawn and dusk are the best times to see roe. During the day they avoid man by lying up in dense bramble scrub, but at daybreak and at twilight they're out among the newly planted firs and busy feeding. They're browsers and very catholic in their tastes. A roe will eat what he can find where he can find it. Almost any plant is acceptable. Buttercup, primrose and willow herb are all taken, even the flower heads. There was even a roe who became addicted to cigarette butts left by picnickers. Woody plants are not omitted from the menu. Over 35 types of tree and shrub are eaten. Even the poisonous yew doesn't seem to trouble the roe. Not surprisingly, they need to digest their food well. They're ruminants, like cows, and have to chew the cud. Roe are very cautious. Bitter experience has taught them to beware of humankind. Scent is very important. The roe's nose is his first line of defense. The ears come next. Look at their shape and size. They're elongated cups and collect and concentrate the woodland sounds. They even turn backwards, the deer equivalent of eyes in the back of your head. Sight is the least important sense, useful only at close quarters. Roe have spent many generations in woodland. It seems they have a built-in method for looking between the branches. even when they're not there. Such sensitivity makes studying the roe very difficult. Marking the deer with a plastic collar is the most effective method yet devised for answering such questions as how they live and how far they travel. But, as Mrs. Beeton might say, first catch your deer. In several parts of Britain, catching and marking schemes are now in progress. This particular catch is at Cheddington in Sussex, but the methods are the same everywhere. A long net is strung between a series of 6-foot saplings in an area where the deer live. The net stretches for 500 yards or more. When all's ready, the roe are driven carefully toward the net. With their less than perfect eyesight, the deer blunder straight into it. The deer aren't hurt at all by the net, but the men must be careful. A roebuck's horns are deadly weapons. Once caught, there's a rapid check on the animal's condition, everything from height to weight. The deer's brief captivity ends when the collar is fitted. Each is individually marked with its own color code. This way, every roe caught can later be identified, even from a distance. After marking, they're immediately free. Each animal in the net means the scientists can make a more accurate assessment of the deer's population and health in the wood. This gives a better balance between the needs of the deer and the forest. So far, it's been found that most deer live about 7 years. They can be quite nomadic, too. One roebuck traveled 8 miles in a single day. Despite this, they usually remain on a definite territory, especially during the July breeding season, or rut. For some months before the rut, the larger males have been enforcing their claim to an area of woodland. Any intruder is barked at, even man. The bucks mark their territory on trees, using scent from 3 face glands. Pawing the ground is used to discourage any rival buck. The same function is served by a fraying display on a handy tree. But it's a demonstration that can be disastrous for the tree. Rivals sometimes even come to blows. If these displays are successful, the male next entices a female onto his territory. Then he must court her. Courtship involves much following by the buck. He's helped by 2 specialized glands on the female's hind legs. They secrete a strong scent, which allows him to trail her easily. The buck's very persistent. Not even a fence will stop a male who's winded a doe in heat. But finding the doe is only the beginning. The next step is a lot more energetic. Long, hard chases across relatively open areas of forest. Although they're usually extremely cautious in their movements, during these rutting chases, the deer seem quite oblivious to any danger. It's not known why the deer perform this rutting chase. Perhaps it ensures only the fittest males mate, or possibly it's a way of overcoming the female's natural aversion to close contact. Often pursuit becomes very stylized and takes the form of ring running around a prominent object. In this case, it's an old tree stump, but any obvious landmark will do. We're about to see a very rare sight. The deer change from clockwise to counterclockwise running, behavior which has never before been filmed. Ring running often leads to a semi-permanent track, or if two objects are used, to a figure of 8. These were once held in dread by country folk as the work of witches. The chase can last for miles, and often does. But gradually the doe becomes more receptive. She stops and seems almost to tease the male. As courtship progresses, the doe eventually stands and allows the buck to serve her. Roe deer can mate as many as 6 times in 5 minutes. Then suddenly, it's over. Buck and doe part company, and the male takes no further interest in his mate or their future children. Territories are abandoned. Both sexes again take on a solitary existence, browsing on the rich vegetation of summer and late autumn. But by the end of October, the warm autumnal glow begins to leave the forest rides. As the vegetation slowly withers, food gets scarcer and tastes of frost. The lack of vegetation and the cold forces the roe to band together in small family groups of 4 or 5. Sometimes as many as 9 deer have been seen in these mini herds. They'll stay this way for the next 4 months. Those that survive. Their greatest testing time is fast approaching, the long, bleak months of winter. A really bad winter can be a killer, decimating the deer population with the twin blights of starvation and cold. An icy shroud covers the vegetation, and the deer are forced to find food where they may. Birds too feel the pinch. These birds are natives of China. They're golden pheasants. They were accidentally released into Thetford in 1880, and they've adapted surprisingly well. Despite such Arctic conditions, the birds still seem to be able to find some food about. This woodcock gets a worm. With such a dearth of forage, the deer turn to any sort of plant or tree. Pine trees may now be eaten. Cropping the top of a sapling makes it useless to the forester, one reason why the deer population must be controlled. But providing it is not too severe, the cold weather serves a useful purpose. The harsh conditions weed out the old and infirm and keep the species up to scratch. Spring, when it arrives, is as welcome to the roe as it is to man. The roebuck's antlers are now completing their regrowth encased in a sheath of skin or velvet. All over the wood, life begins to stir after the idling months of winter. Spring, too, is the time for births. The female roe has an extended pregnancy. After mating, the fertilized egg remains within the doe in a sort of embryonic hibernation. Only after 5 months does it begin to grow and develop. The young are born 5 months later, in late April. The young deer, or kids, are able to follow the mother within 4 days of birth. Before this, the female leaves them alone in the wood. You don't often see a kid like this. They're hidden away in the deepest area of scrub the mother can find. With their camouflage coat, they're very difficult to spot, unless they decide to move. Mother returns each day to suckle the infant. This strategy lessens the kid's chances of being discovered by man. Twin births are common in Thetford Chase, and this brings a danger. In a normal year, the deer population in the forest can increase by about 1/3. For a wood of limited extent, such as Thetford, a baby boom of this size is a danger to both the roe and to the forest. Competition for the limited food supply can lead to starvation in the coming winter, and more males will mean a lot more scent making and fraying displays during the rut. The extra damage to the trees can make the forest uneconomic. There are no natural predators to limit the deer's numbers, and no empty areas of forest left to colonize. It's left to man to redress the balance. Sometimes control is accidental. Despite the signs, up to 100 deer die each year on the roads in Thetford Chase. Usually it's the driver who's to blame. Pushing his car so fast along the forest lanes, he's unable to avoid a deer standing by the verge. Occasionally the deer wander into traps meant for other animals. It's at times like these that the forest ranger needs a dog. A dog's nose can detect deer that would otherwise be overlooked. In this case, it's too late. A female roe has trapped her leg in a snare meant for a fox. Caught by the wire noose around her leg and out of reach of water or food, she's probably taken several agonizing days to die. But man is not always to blame. On rare occasions, nature herself conspires against the roe. Freak storms can snap the exposed furs like straws. Any deer unfortunate enough to be underneath is doomed. But all such accidental killing is indiscriminate. Fit and sick, young and old alike are taken. If the herd is to thrive, responsible human control must take the place of natural selection. This roebuck is a superb example of his race. Look at his springy step, the strong neck, and above all, his antlers. They are large and have 3 prongs, or tines, that are the roe deer's trademark. Unfortunately, not all males develop like this. This antler collection is taken from deer shot at Thetford. None show the normal 3-tined antler. All are misshapen. With some, it is due to environmental factors. These antlers are frostbitten. But with others, the fault is genetic. In every generation, a certain proportion of bucks are born who grow deformed antlers. If a freak like this were allowed to breed, it's possible that soon every male in the forest would be in some way malformed. As most forest rangers will tell you, culling or shooting the deer is the least enjoyable part of their job. But they know the dangers the deer face if left to their own devices. It's a job that must be done. Each ranger controls a given area of woodland, his own particular beat. He works this area all year round and learns the features of each deer on his beat, so he's in an excellent position to know which animal must be culled. Once again, the ranger's dog is useful. He's only needed very occasionally when a deer is shot but only wounded. Then his sense of smell is invaluable. The dog must be well trained. It's no good him barking or snapping at flies if there's deer about. He has to be able to wait silently, sometimes for hours, until a shot is taken. Most shooting is done from a high seat. Not only is there less chance of a deer scenting the hunter if he's 12 feet above ground, but for some reason, roe very rarely look upwards. This fine buck has nothing to fear. But here's the animal the ranger must cull. His antlers have no tines, and they point almost backwards. One shot, and it's a sudden, painless end. It may seem harsh, but in the long run it's for the best. Only by such constant management will the next generation remain vigorous. Without it, the deer stock might easily be weakened. The surviving bucks can now compete for females, mate, and sire strong, healthy offspring. In many ways, the story of the Thetford roe is a salutary one. It gives the lie to those that think it impossible for man and any large mammal to coexist. With careful management, the forests can reap a double harvest: timber and the inexpressible delight of watching such beautiful creatures as the roe. A wary hunter sniffs the air in a wild Welsh valley. Polecats were once common throughout Britain, but by the 1950s only a handful remained, confined to the woods and dingles of Wales. So what led to the sudden decline of this shy nocturnal creature? Polecats are opportunists and often feed on roadside carrion. Sadly, today most people's only glimpse of a polecat is a bundle of fur by the side of the road, especially in autumn, when young polecats themselves become road casualties. Polecats belong to the weasel family and are among Britain's oldest native mammals. They have always been persecuted by man. Yet it is a different story for a close relation, the domesticated ferret. The ferret is a polecat in a white coat, bred by man from wild polecats since Roman times to flush rabbits from their burrows. Ferreting is still a popular country sport, and these ferocious little animals are greatly admired by their masters. Pure ferrets are albino with pink eyes. These are darker polecat ferrets, a cross between a ferret and a wild polecat. Polecats are more aggressive than ferrets and are impossible to keep. So what dreadful deeds turned man against the polecat? Though shy and elusive, they are not afraid of human habitation and are notorious killers of poultry. The French name, Polechat, means chicken cat, and it is this reputation as a killer of poultry that has done the polecat most harm. Nor is this reputation unfounded. During the 19th century, pheasant shooting became popular across the country. Polecats found the newly introduced birds easy game, but soon themselves fell victim to the gamekeepers' gin traps. Many were also trapped for their fur, known as fitch fur, and numbers began to fall rapidly. After the war, the gamekeeper's gibbet became a less common sight, but this was nearly too late for the polecat. Only a few clung on in remote parts of mid-Wales. When deadly myxomatosis decimated the rabbit population in the 1950s, polecats sought new prey, plentiful in the Welsh river valleys and marshes. They have been known to paralyze frogs by skillfully breaking their backs. This allows them to keep a stock of fresh frogs for the winter months. Polecats prefer to hunt by night, but they have a keen nose for carrion at any time. In some parts of Wales, farmers string up dead crows to frighten others away, the original scarecrow. A warning ignored by this determined polecat. Powerful jaws enable it to use its full weight to drag its prize away. Polecats are solitary hunters and tend to stay within the bounds of their own territories. The only time they actively seek out another of their kind is during the breeding season. Female polecats come into heat towards the start of April. Most polecats are able to breed once they are a year old. This male senses that a female in breeding condition has crossed his territory. He begins to follow her musky trail of scent markings through the woods, warily, because at this time of year he must also be ready to fend off other males. One by one, the scent messengers lure him on. He sees well at night, but mainly he's led by the nose. At last he finds her. The rough wooing that follows is typical polecat behavior and causes the female to ovulate prior to mating. The male drags her about by the scruff of the neck for quite some time, inflicting wounds which will show later as scar tissue, a sure sign that a female has been mated. It looks more like rape than seduction. Mating can take over an hour. Finally, the male leaves the female to lick her wounds. It will be 6 weeks before the female gives birth, in midsummer. Her mate will play no further part in the rearing of his offspring. During the next few weeks, the female spends most of her time hunting. She must put on weight in preparation for the confinement ahead. In summer, grey herons stalk the shallow streams. With fish so plentiful, it's surprising that this relative of the otter ignores the river's bounty. The female has been feeding on a varied diet of voles, rabbits, worms and frogs. Polecats don't seem to like getting wet. By now, the female has found a suitable place to raise her young. Polecats frequently use rabbit burrows after they have eaten the occupants. But first, there are preparations to be made. She carefully packs the hollow with dead leaves and bracken to form a snug nest. One night in June, she gives birth to 7 kits. Polecats can produce litters of 10, but it is unlikely that all would survive. At first, the young are blind and covered with silky white hair. Their main objective is to drink as much milk as possible. It's now clear why the female put on weight earlier in the spring. There is no time to go hunting. During the kit's first few weeks of life, she suckles the litter almost continuously. After 6 weeks, their white coat has been covered by darker guard hairs, and their eyes are open. By now they're able to eat flesh. The distinctive mask begins to appear at this stage. Managing a handful of kits like this is a full-time business. Already they are eager to explore their surroundings, but at this stage it is dangerous to venture outside. Their mother always blocks up the entrance with leaves before she goes hunting, to keep predators such as foxes and buzzards at bay. Now that the rabbit population has recovered from myxomatosis, they are once again a prime target for polecats. The mother polecat stalks the rabbits when they are feeding, soon after dawn. Polecats have poor vision, but a highly developed sense of smell. She attacks from behind, sinking her jaws into the rabbit's neck to deliver a swift, deadly bite. Then she drags the carcass home for the waiting kits. They, meanwhile, hungry and impatient, have pushed their protective curtain of leaves aside, alerted by the smell of supper. She will allow them to eat their fill before she satisfies her own hunger. Only when they have had enough does she settle down to feed undisturbed. During autumn, it is not only the trees which change colour. Some adult polecats molt over a period of about 10 days, losing most of their dark guard hairs, exposing a thick pelt of pale underfur. Some adults also molt during the spring, although the colour change is less noticeable. They mark their territories with a fetid smell that tells any other visiting polecat it is trespassing. The stink of a polecat's scent glands have earned it the title foul mart. Other polecats ignore these pungent warnings at their peril. This unsuspecting youngster has crossed another's territory. After a brief skirmish, the young intruder is forced to give up its kill to the adult. By now, the young polecats are 12 weeks old and are keen to explore. Their masked faces are alert to every drifting scent. They have to learn what's worth eating and what to avoid. Following the shiny track of a slug brings a choice reward for an inquisitive youngster. It seems that slugs and snails are what little polecats are made of. But there is still much to learn. These are valuable weeks as they spend a great deal of time play fighting, refining the hunting skills they'll need for larger prey. The classic neck bite, though instinctive, has to be practiced before it is perfect. As the young polecats approach their first winter, they will need every ounce of skill for the solitary life ahead. Their mother stops feeding them. From now on, they're on their own. Now is the cruelest time for the polecat. Small wonder that it's tempted to move close to the comforts of man and take its chance, along with others. It's in these cold winter months that many inexperienced polecats die. Unlike weasels and stoats, they do not forage for mice or voles when the ground is frozen hard. Instead, many seek shelter in barns and outhouses where they can avoid the worst of the weather. It is now that most sightings of polecats are made. Often there is a bonus, wood mice. The mice have moved in to steal the farmer's grain. Now they'll become a meal for the polecat. Yet some farmers still regard polecats as vermin, even though they keep down rats and mice. The polecat starts to explore its new winter quarters. Unfortunately, it hasn't got the barn all to itself. Another hunter appears in the loft, the farmer's ferret, perhaps set to catch mice, or on an unofficial sortie from its cage. This is a battle which might easily turn into a love match. Under the skin, every domestic ferret is still a polecat and able to interbreed. Their offspring, polecat ferrets, often manage to live successfully in the wild. But what about the future of our native wild polecat? They are now a protected species, and in Wales at least, they are increasing. Every autumn a new generation disperses to set up territories of their own. During the winter, many will starve. Others will fall victim to fox, buzzard, or man. Yet every year the polecat's frontiers spread outwards from Wales, regaining ground it gave up long ago, until, in time, perhaps the polecat's musky odour will again become familiar throughout the British countryside.